Yes, and I think there will be sightings, and I get the feeling, and this is where consciousness comes in, because all these guys who were talking about how they were afraid, etc., and I've talked to so many who had these feelings. It's all about feelings. It's all about what goes on in the spirit of your head. I think really the government in this country wants to release this information. Military intelligence does, because I know some of them, and I think they are watching what happens in terms of the public's reaction to
this conference Monday, then, is important.
Yeah, I think it's important.
Thanks, Shirley.
Okay.
Shirley MacLaine and her new book, all of her books have been bestsellers. The new one is Saging While Aging. We'll be right back with our panel, but as we go to break, here is the aforementioned clip, which we didn't have before, of Dennis Kucinich in a recent debate explaining to Tim Russert his encounter with a UFO.
They should ask Governor Richardson. He's the governor of it.
The godmother of your daughter, Shirley MacLaine, writes in her new book that you sighted a UFO over her home in Washington State, that you found the encounter extremely moving, that it was a triangular craft, silent and hovering, that you felt a connection to your heart and heard directions in your mind. Now, did you see a UFO?
I did, and the rest of the account, it was unidentified flying object, okay? It's like, it's unidentified. I saw something.
And he's looking on his radar, and he sees this big mass of something coming toward his airplane. It goes from his nose to the right, to the back, and it moves in 9 to 10 seconds. It goes from 6, 7 miles in front of him to 6 or 7, 8 miles behind him, and then back over to the left.
Welcome back. Our panel remains. Added to it is John Callahan, the former division chief of the Accidents and Investigation Branch of the FAA in Washington. He was sworn to secrecy about what we're going to tell you now. In 1986, a Japanese pilot said he saw twin cylinders flying in formation within 500 feet of his air cargo jet. He claimed the object was the size of 2 aircraft carriers, and it followed him for over 30 minutes. Anchorage air controllers registered a radar target. The U.S. Air Force controllers reported seeing a blip, but moments later, it was gone. This, I imagine, will also be discussed at this big meeting on Monday. John Callahan, what did you make of this?
Well, we went up to, when I got a call from Alaska about what to tell the media that was overrunning their office. When I asked him why, he says, oh, it's that UFO thing, you know, but who believes in UFOs? And I said, I have no idea what you're talking about. And he went on to explain how the 747 was chased for 31 minutes in Alaska. So I said, well, tell the media that this is under investigation, and then send all that data, all the discs, the voice tapes, all the printouts to the FAA Tech Center in Atlantic City, and we'll go up and take a look. I went up to Atlantic City the next day at the FAA Tech Center, and I had the specialist up there play back what the controller seen on his scope, you would call it. And I had him synchronize the voice tapes to the radar so you could hear what was happening and look over the controller's shoulders if he was sitting there. And a blind man could see that there was a target along with that 747 where there shouldn't have been any target. And it came more than once. When we get all done with that, we had the specialist put out a chart that's about 8 to 12 feet long that showed every hit on the radar of the 747 and where the other targets were. The hardware people got up to explain what we were looking at, and they said there's nothing wrong with the hardware. Everything over here is a software problem. The software people come up and said there's nothing wrong with the software. Everything you're looking at here is a hardware problem.
And after this incident, you said that Admiral Engel, the then FAA administrator, held a briefing with members of the FBI, CIA, and President Reagan's scientific study team. What was the result of that meeting?
Well, he set the meeting up, and my task was to hand off this event to the Reagan scientific study team because the FAA does not handle UFOs.
And what did they do with it?
When we got all done with our briefing, it took a couple hours. A CIA man stood up and said, "This event never happened. We were never here. You're all sworn to secrecy, and we're confiscating all this data."
What do you make of that, Sergeant Peniston? What do you make of that?
Well, that's exactly what happened with Bentwaters. I don't admit it, the deniability on it.
Why? Colonel, why? Why deny what they saw? I don't understand it.
That's puzzled me for years. The very interesting thing is I made a memo up, which is now public, through no fault of mine. I did not release it, is what I'm saying. And I fully expected an investigation. I have never been debriefed.
James Fox, who, by the way, has a new movie in the works called Beyond the Blue. His early one was Out of the Blue. Why do they deny it, in your opinion, as a layman?
I would say what you can't control, why disclose that information? Wouldn't it worry the public? I mean, their very job is to protect us, and yet they have no means of protecting us. Shall these things turn out to be hostile? I'm not saying they're hostile, but you know, they have no control of the situation. So why would they disclose?
Fife, is it that they don't know, and they don't like to say they don't know?
Yeah, I think that's human nature, don't you, Larry? People, especially if they're in charge and they're in the government, they don't like to admit that they don't control or they don't know something, because that means that if that's the truth, then there's a high degree of vulnerability out there, and the public might get very concerned about that.
Why would so many people, all of you like yourselves, be lying?
Yeah.
I mean, what's the point? First of all, you're generally humiliated.
Yeah.
You're kind of laughed at.
Well, I think less so now, and that's the purpose of this press conference on Monday, with very convincing new evidence that's going to be put out there, and I would hope that the United States government would start another Project Blue Book, or a very high-level commission that's instituted to really look objectively at these sightings.
I thought it was very interesting because the Air Force's official position is that they terminated Project Blue Book back in 1969, and they no longer investigate UFO sightings. But then you said that OSI investigated your case, and yet the order came from somewhere else.
It came from somewhere beyond the base, and it was not known to base officials. It was done through back-channel means.
So they did investigate. They're saying they haven't been investigating since '69. That's the official position, and yet they...
Weird.
Yeah.
We'll be back with more of this edition of Larry King Live as we further investigate the subject of UFOs. Don't go away.
And then the red light was sort of casting a glow over the whole thing, so it looked like a round disc.
People say, "Mike, now you saw a B-2 bomber." My response was, we could land all 40 of our B-2 bombers on the wing of that craft.
I would go ahead and feel the craft, which was warm.
Our panel remains. Joining us from Tucson, Arizona is James McGehee. He is an amateur astronomer and a retired United States Air Force pilot and a skeptic about all of this. Now, James, after all you hear and all you see, and these responsible people, these are not kooks coming off the street, doesn't that cause you to bend a little?
No, not at all, because what they're talking about is basically anecdotal stories, and all of these things are basically easily explainable. There's simply no compelling evidence that an alien spacecraft has ever visited the Earth. And if there were, then of course we would have scientists interested in this, and they're not. For this to be a real phenomena, i.e. spacecraft from another world, we would have to expect that the conspiracy would not only be among governments, among militaries, among the news media, but it also would have to be involved in all scientists and scientific organizations in the world.
So, James, are you saying that Colonel Halt and Sergeant Peniston did not see what they say they saw?
I think they misinterpreted what they saw. I think they saw lights that night. There was a Cosmos 749 satellite rocket booster that came down that night, a bright meteor fireball on the first night, and there was a police car driving around in the forested area that night with his lights on as well. On the second night, it's clear that from the tape, which the lighthouse has a 5-second period, and that he was actually looking at the lighthouse. It's also
Colonel,
clear.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Jim.
It's also clear that the instruments they were using